My name is Dr. Alex Ramsey, and I've spent the last 2 decades of my life peering into the darkest corners of the human psyche. As a forensic psychologist, I've sat across from individuals who have committed unspeakable acts, delved into their minds, trying to understand the why, the how, the intricate workings of a mind capable of such darkness. I've worked with hardened criminals, those whose eyes hold no remorse, and with those who seem lost in a maze of their own making, their actions a desperate cry for help gone tragically wrong. But of all the cases that have crossed my path, none has stayed with me quite like the story I'm about to share. September 15, 2023, dawned like any other autumn morning in Millbrook, Connecticut. The maple trees lining Main Street had just begun their annual transformation, hints of gold and crimson peeking through their still green canopies. At Millbrook High School, Sarah Chen sat in her usual spot in AP English, 3rd row from the front, 2nd seat from the window. The 16-year-old junior was known for her quiet intelligence and gentle smile. Her classmates would later recall that nothing seemed out of ordinary that day. James Morton, 34, stood at the front of the classroom, chalk dust on his sleeve as he discussed the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. He had been teaching at Millbrook High for 7 years, respected by colleagues and beloved by students for his passionate teaching style and ability to make classic literature come alive. Married with no children, Morton lived in a modest colonial house just outside town with his wife Rachel, a local real estate agent. What no one knew, not Sarah's parents, not her best friend Emma, not even Rachel Morton, was that this ordinary Thursday would be the last normal day in all their lives. The carefully constructed facade that both Sarah and James had maintained was about to crumble, revealing a dark web of obsession, manipulation, and forbidden attraction that would eventually lead them both down a path of no return. The warning signs were there, subtle but present. Sarah's mother would later show me her daughter's journal, its pages filled with increasingly cryptic entries. Her teachers had noticed a slight drop in her usually impeccable grades. And James? His colleagues remembered him being more distracted than usual, spending long hours in his classroom after school, claiming to grade papers. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20ths. On that Thursday, as Sarah sat in her usual seat and James discussed the green light at the end of Daisy's dock, no one could have predicted the tragedy that would unfold over the next 10 days. No one could have imagined that by the end of the month, 2 lives would be lost, 3 families shattered, and an entire community left grappling with questions that would never find satisfactory answers. As I stand here today, examining the evidence, reading through text messages, and interviewing those left behind, I'm struck by how quickly the ordinary can transform into the unthinkable. But to understand how this story ends, we need to go back to the subtle shifts and quiet moments that set this tragedy in motion. The first red flag appeared 3 months earlier, though at the time it seemed innocuous enough. Sarah had joined the school's creative writing club, which James Morton supervised every Tuesday afternoon. Her parents, Michael and Linda Chun, both successful physicians at Hartford General Hospital, were pleased with their daughter's growing interest in literature. They saw it as another achievement to add to her already impressive college application portfolio. During these sessions, James noticed Sarah's exceptional writing talent. Her short stories revealed a maturity beyond her years, often exploring themes of isolation and forbidden love. In one particular piece that would later draw the attention of investigators, she wrote about a young woman trapped in a gilded cage, yearning for someone who could truly understand her. Emma Torres, Sarah's best friend since 7th grade, was the first to notice the subtle changes in their dynamic. Sarah started staying later and later at the writing club. Emma told me during our interview at her family's kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She'd text me about these amazing conversations she was having with Mr. Morton about books, about life. At first, I thought it was just her being her usual overachiever self. The text messages Emma mentioned would later become crucial evidence. What started as discussions about literature gradually evolved into more personal exchanges. James began sharing his own struggles with feeling misunderstood, his growing dissatisfaction with his marriage, his sense that life was passing him by. Sarah, in turn, confided in him about her parents' high expectations, her feelings of alienation, her desire to break free from the path others had chosen for her. Rachel Morton, James's wife of 8 years, noticed changes in her husband too. He was always on his phone, she told me, her voice tight with barely contained emotion. When I'd ask about it, he'd say it was just work stuff, grading papers, responding to student questions. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. The digital footprint they left behind tells a story of growing obsession. Between June and September, James and Sarah exchanged over 2,300 text messages. Their communication started during reasonable hours but gradually extended into late nights and early mornings. The content evolved from discussions of literature to increasingly personal and inappropriate conversations. On August 23, 3 weeks before their disappearance, security cameras captured their first physical encounter outside of school. Sarah had told her parents she was studying at the library. Instead, she met James at Riverside Park, 2 towns over. They sat on a bench overlooking the water for nearly 2 hours, talking. To any passerby, they might have looked like a father and daughter having a heart-to-heart. But the security footage shows something more intimate: subtle touches, prolonged eye contact, bodies turned toward each other in a way that suggested a deeper connection. Linda Chun, reviewing her daughter's bank statements after her disappearance, found a transaction from that day, a coffee shop near the park. "I remember thinking it was odd," she told me, her medical training evident in her composed demeanor. Sarah usually studied at the library close to home. But teenagers do unexpected things sometimes. You don't immediately jump to the worst conclusions. But the worst was yet to come. In the days leading up to September 15th, the frequency of their messages increased dramatically. James began researching distant cities, car rentals, and ways to withdraw money without leaving a trace. Sarah, meanwhile, slowly began moving her savings from her college fund to a separate account, taking care not to withdraw amounts large enough to trigger notifications to her parents. They were planning something. The question that would haunt their families, their community, and ultimately me, was whether anyone could have stopped what was about to unfold. The morning of September 16th brought the first signs that something was terribly wrong. Rachel Morton woke to find her husband's side of the bed empty, his car gone from the driveway. At first, she assumed he'd left early for work. It wasn't unprecedented for him to head to school before dawn to prepare for classes. But when she checked their shared bank account on her phone, her heart stopped. Their savings account had been drained of $43,000. Meanwhile, across town, Linda Chun knocked on her daughter's bedroom door at 6:45 a.m., their usual morning routine. When Sarah didn't respond, Linda opened the door to find the bed made, looking untouched. A handwritten note lay on the pillow: "Mom and Dad, I'm sorry. Please don't look for me. I need to live my own life. I love you." I remember standing in that doorway, reading the note over and over, Linda told me, her professional composure finally cracking during our third interview. It was Sarah's handwriting, but the words, they didn't sound like her at all. It was like someone else was speaking through her. By 8 a.m., both families had contacted the Millbrook Police Department. Officer Derek Martinez, who took the initial reports, noticed the connection immediately: a teacher and student missing on the same day. When he arrived at Millbrook High School, he found Principal Sandra Thompson already in crisis mode. James had sent her a brief email at 4:13 a.m. "I apologize for the short notice, but I won't be coming in today. Or ever again. I'm sorry for letting everyone down." A search of James's classroom revealed his gradebook open on his desk, Sarah's latest essay on top, marked with an A+ and extensive comments in the margins. But it was what they found in his desk drawer that sent chills down Officer Martinez's spine: a small notebook filled with what appeared to be draft messages to Sarah, some crossed out, others circled, all increasingly personal and inappropriate. "Some of the messages were clearly never sent," Martinez explained, showing me photographs of the notebook's pages. But they showed a man struggling with feelings he knew were wrong. There were entries where he questioned himself, asked what he was doing. Then others where he justified it, convinced himself it was real love. The local media picked up the story by noon. By evening, it had gone national. The headlines wrote themselves: "Teacher abducts honor student. Missing teen and married teacher. A small town's nightmare. Parents' trust betrayed." But those headlines missed the complexity of what was really happening: a carefully planned escape by two people who had convinced themselves they were star-crossed lovers rather than predator and prey. Security footage from a gas station just outside of Hartford captured them at 5:47 a.m. that morning. James was paying for gas while Sarah waited in his black Honda Civic, her face partially hidden by a hooded sweatshirt. They looked calm, methodical. This wasn't a spontaneous decision, but rather the culmination of months of planning. "What strikes me about that footage," I told the investigating officers, "is how normal they appear." James even smiled at the cashier. Sarah helped herself to a drink from the cooler. They looked like any father and daughter on a road trip. That's what makes this case so chilling: the ability of both parties to compartmentalize, to act normal while doing something so profoundly destructive. The manhunt that followed was unprecedented in Millbrook's history. Local and state police coordinated with the FBI, setting up a command center in the high school gymnasium. James's Honda Civic became the subject of a multi-state BOLO, be on the lookout, alert. Every toll booth camera, every gas station security feed, every hotel check-in system along the major highways was monitored. We knew we were racing against time, FBI Special Agent Catherine Walsh told me. The first 48 hours in these cases are crucial. But this wasn't your typical abduction. They had a head start, and more importantly, they had a plan. That plan began to reveal itself as investigators dug deeper into their digital footprints. In the weeks leading up to their disappearance, James had accessed websites about living off the grid, changing identities, and crossing the Canadian border. Sarah, using her school laptop, had researched remote towns in the Pacific Northwest. They had chosen their destination carefully: Whitefish, Montana, a small resort town near Glacier National Park, far from the East Coast and any connecting ties. The discovery of their planned destination came from an unlikely source. Emma Torres, still processing the betrayal of her best friend, remembered a conversation from months earlier. Sarah was obsessed with this book, The Lake House in Winter. It was about a couple who ran away to Montana to escape their past. She kept talking about how peaceful it sounded, how free the characters were. I didn't think anything of it at the time. The morning of September 18th brought the first confirmed sighting. A waitress at a diner in Cleveland, Ohio, recognized them from the news. The man seemed protective, almost possessive, she reported. The girl barely spoke. When I asked if everything was okay, she just nodded and looked away. By this point, the story had captured national attention. Nancy Grace devoted an entire show to the case, bringing in experts to analyze James's psychology and Sarah's potential motivations. Social media exploded with theories and supposed sightings. The hashtag #FindSarahChan trended nationwide. Rachel Morton, devastated and humiliated, filed for divorce. In an exclusive interview with local news, she revealed that she and James had been trying to have a baby for the past 3 years. "I thought our marriage was just going through a rough patch," she said, her voice breaking. "I never imagined he was capable of something like this." The Chens maintained a dignified silence in public, but privately, they were falling apart. Linda would stand in Sarah's room for hours, Michael Chun confided during one of our sessions. She kept saying she should have seen it coming. We both should have. We were so focused on her academic success, on her future. Did we miss signs that she was vulnerable to this kind of manipulation? As law enforcement closed in on their location, James and Sarah remained one step ahead. They abandoned his Honda Civic in a Minneapolis parking lot, switching to a used Toyota purchased with cash under a false name. They changed their appearances. Security footage from a Walmart showed James with a shaved head and Sarah with newly dyed black hair. But their carefully constructed plan was about to unravel in ways neither of them could have anticipated. The fantasy of their escape was about to collide with the harsh reality of life on the run, and the consequences would be devastating for everyone involved. The first cracks in their facade appeared on September 21st, 5 days into their journey. A gas station security camera in Billings, Montana, captured what appeared to be their first public argument. Sarah, visibly distressed, tried to walk away from the Toyota while James followed, grabbing her arm. Though there was no audio, the body language spoke volumes. Watching that footage, you can see the fantasy starting to crumble, FBI profiler Mark Davidson explained to me. Reality was setting in. They weren't star-crossed lovers in some romantic novel anymore. They were a middle-aged man and a teenage girl, running low on money, living out of a car, and realizing there was no happy ending to their story. Their ATM withdrawals painted a desperate picture. The initial $43,000 James had taken was dwindling rapidly. Hotel receipts showed they were staying in increasingly cheaper motels, moving from mid-range chains to roadside establishments that didn't ask too many questions. Sarah's college fund, which she had partially accessed, was nearly depleted. A motel owner in Great Falls, Montana, provided crucial insight into their deteriorating mental states. The girl looked scared, Harold Mackenzie told investigators. Not of him exactly, but of everything. The man kept saying everything would work out, but his voice had this edge to it. Like he was trying to convince himself more than her. Text messages recovered from a burner phone they purchased showed Sarah had attempted to contact Emma twice during this period. The messages were never sent, saved as drafts instead. I made a terrible mistake. I don't know how to get out of this. James's mental state was equally concerning. Security footage from a pharmacy showed him purchasing anxiety medication and sleeping pills. His internet searches on the burner phone became increasingly erratic. International flights with no passport, consequences of crossing Canadian border illegally, suicide pacts in literature. The psychological pressure they were under was immense, I explained to the investigating team. James was watching his carefully constructed plan fall apart. Sarah was realizing that running away wasn't the romantic adventure she'd imagined. They were both trapped in a situation rapidly spinning out of control. On September 23rd, they reached Whitefish, Montana. The tourist season was winding down, and the town was transitioning into its quieter autumn phase. They checked into the Pine Lodge Motel under the names David and Jenny Wilson, paying cash for a week's stay. The motel's security camera captured what would be their last known movements. The footage shows James pacing in the parking lot late at night, chain-smoking cigarettes, a habit his wife later confirmed he had quit years ago. Sarah can be seen sitting by the window of their room, her silhouette visible through the curtains, seemingly motionless for hours. They were no longer the confident runaways from the Cleveland diner. They were two people who had reached the end of their road, literally and figuratively. What happened in room 112 of the Pine Lodge Motel over the next 24 hours would shock even the most seasoned investigators, leaving families on both coasts devastated and a nation struggling to understand the tragic conclusion to this modern-day forbidden romance. September 24th dawned cold and overcast in Whitefish. The morning clerk at Pine Lodge Motel, Jenny Reeves, noticed nothing unusual about room 112. The Do Not Disturb sign hung on the doorknob, and the curtains remained drawn, nothing out of the ordinary for guests who'd arrived late the previous night. By noon, however, housekeeping reported a concerning detail: sounds of sobbing coming from the room. I knocked but nobody answered, Maria Gonzalez, the housekeeper, later testified. Just crying, then silence, then more crying. Something didn't feel right. At 2:47 p.m., another guest reported the sound of breaking glass. The motel manager, Robert Larson, made the decision to conduct a welfare check. What he found would haunt him for years to come. The door was chained from the inside, Larson recalled during our interview, his hands shaking as he lit a cigarette. I could see through the gap, pills scattered across the floor, empty bottles on the nightstand. And the bathroom door. There was water seeping under it. Local police arrived within minutes of Larson's 911 call. They found James and Sarah in the bathtub, fully clothed, submerged in pink-tinged water. A combination of prescription medications and alcohol had been their chosen method. On the bed lay two handwritten letters, one addressed to their families, another to the world at large. The letters revealed their final state of mind, Detective Sarah Morrison shared with me. James's writing was erratic, filled with phrases about eternal love and escaping society's judgment. Sarah's letter, it was different. More lucid. More resigned. She wrote about feeling trapped, not just by their situation, but by the choices that had led them there. Toxicology reports would later confirm that James had taken the fatal dose first, likely trying to demonstrate his commitment to their pact. Sarah's letter suggested she had hesitated, writing additional passages after James had lost consciousness. Her final words were an apology to her parents. I realize now that love isn't supposed to hurt this much. The investigation revealed that James had purchased the medications using multiple pharmacies along their journey, accumulating enough for their final act. The broken glass came from the mirrors they had shattered, a detail that psychologists would later analyze as a possible symbol of their shattered illusions. What strikes me most about the scene, I told the investigating team, was its theatrical nature. They had staged their deaths like a tragic romance, but the reality was far messier, far more tragic than any literary ending. This wasn't Romeo and Juliet. This was a manipulated teenager and a predatory adult reaching the inevitable conclusion of their destructive fantasy. The news of their deaths broke nationwide that evening, sending shockwaves through communities on both coasts. Millbrook High School canceled classes for a week. Crisis counselors were brought in to help students process the tragedy. The media descended on Whitefish, turning the Pine Lodge Motel into an unwanted tourist attraction. In the aftermath of the tragedy, both communities, Millbrook and Whitefish, struggled to make sense of what had happened. The question that echoed through every conversation, every investigation meeting, every therapy session was the same: how did we miss this? These cases leave lasting scars, FBI Special Agent Walsh explained during our final interview. Not just on the families directly involved, but on everyone who witnessed it unfold. It challenges our basic assumptions about trust, about the people we think we know. The Chen family retreated from public life, closing their medical practices and eventually moving to California. We couldn't walk down the street without feeling the stares, the whispers, Michael Chen told me during our last conversation. Every parent in town was thinking the same thing. Could this have been my child? Rachel Morton faced her own struggles. The divorce was finalized posthumously, but the process of untangling her life from James's proved emotionally devastating. The hardest part, she shared, was finding things in our house, notes, photos, everyday items, and wondering if he was already planning it when these moments happened. Was any of our marriage real? Millbrook High School implemented sweeping changes. New policies restricted one-on-one interactions between teachers and students. The Creative Writing Club was temporarily suspended, later reinstated with multiple faculty advisors. Mandatory training on recognizing grooming behaviors became part of the staff development program. Emma Torres, perhaps the closest witness to the tragedy's evolution, graduated early and began speaking at schools about recognizing signs of inappropriate student-teacher relationships. "I carry a lot of guilt," she admitted during our final interview. "But I'm trying to turn it into something meaningful. If I can help one person recognize these warning signs, maybe Sarah's death won't be completely in vain." The case led to legislative changes in Connecticut, with Sarah's law strengthening penalties for teachers who engage in inappropriate relationships with students and mandating more robust reporting systems for concerning behavior. As a forensic psychologist, I've studied countless cases of manipulation and abuse, but this one stands out for its tragic culmination. The story of Sarah Chen and James Morton isn't just about a teacher who crossed a line or a student who was led astray. It's about the dangerous intersection of authority, trust, and manipulation, and how a community's blind spots can allow tragedy to develop in plain sight. Today, Room 112 at the Pine Lodge Motel has been renovated and renumbered. The high school's English department has a new teacher. Life has moved on, as it must. But the lessons of this case remain vitally important: the need for vigilance, the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries, and the recognition that sometimes the greatest dangers come disguised as love. Perhaps the most fitting memorial to Sarah Chen isn't the law that bears her name or the changes her death inspired, but the growing awareness that no relationship built on power imbalance and manipulation can ever lead to a happy ending. For those left behind, the healing continues. And for those of us who study such cases, the work goes on, hoping that by understanding these tragedies, we might prevent future ones from unfolding.